Thanks, Steve, and thank you all for sticking it out here on Sunday morning. I'm impressed anyone's here, so thank you. So how many of you have heard of the dairy checkoff program? One sort of, okay. In contrast, how many of you have heard of the Got Milk or the Milk Mustache ads? Yeah, you've all seen those, right? Those ubiquitous ads. Okay, well, this presentation is to show you where that comes from and why checkoff programs are really important. And, you know, I've been following these issues, politics of meat and dairy and the junk food industry in general for a lot of years, and I've done various exposés. And last year I decided I really wanted to hone in on dairy. And, you know, dairy has kind of this special place in our diet, in that the dairy industry, over the course of many decades, has basically brainwashed Americans into thinking that dairy is an essential food. And, you know, I'm not going to get into all the reasons why that's not true. There's lots of good information out there, lots of even mainstream nutrition professionals now saying dairy is not an essential part of the diet, and it even can cause some problems. What I wanted to do for this research, instead of getting into that debate, and it is still hotly contested, mostly thanks to, you know, the misinformation brought to you by those who are paid by the dairy industry, I wanted to get into this issue of how Americans are consuming dairy products, because, you know, the dairy industry wants us to think that, oh, it's just this pure glass of milk, and that's, you know, nature's perfect food. And, you know, whether or not that's true, it turns out that really most Americans aren't consuming just a glass of milk. They're consuming dairy in very unhealthy ways, and dairy is a vector, really, for the least healthy components of our diet. And so that's what I set out to show in this report. So this slide shows how, as milk consumption has declined, cheese consumption has increased, right? So the dairy industry has been very concerned for years about how fluid milk, this is how the industry talks about it, how fluid milk sales have been on the decline, and that's what that first chart shows, marked decline in fluid milk sales. Almond milk has been exploding in recent years, and other forms of non-dairy milks. But at the same time, the dairy industry isn't just, you know, giving up. They're finding other ways to promote their products. In other words, other ways that that cow's milk can be put into the food supply. And so that's what the chart on the right shows. That's good, thank you. That as dairy fluid milk has declined, cheese has increased. So, and this is per capita consumption over about, looks like a 6-year period. So let's look at specific types of dairy consumption patterns. So consumption of milk as a beverage has decreased 50% since 1909. That's a huge percentage for any industry. But it turns out half the milk supply actually goes to make 9 billion pounds of cheese, that's a lot of cheese, and then 1.5 billion gallons of frozen desserts, which mostly means ice cream. And this statistic kind of blew me away, that half of all milk is consumed either as flavored milk, right, which comes with a lot of cereal, flavored milk which comes with a lot of sugar, cereal which comes also with a lot of sugar, and then, or in a drink like coffee, and of course we know a lot of people are also putting, more sugar in their coffee drink. So again, this is just to defy the notion that dairy, again, whether you think it's good for you or not, is being consumed in healthful ways. And so this is to show you what I was saying earlier about how dairy is used as a vehicle for saturated fat and added sugar. So it turns out that cheese is the single largest source of saturated fat in our diet. So the federal government tracks, you know, where the types of foods that Americans eat and where we're getting various components of food. And you might have thought beef, right? Also, obviously, a big component of saturated fat in the diet would have been number one. But no, actually, cheese is above beef when it comes to where Americans are getting unfortunate amounts of saturated fat in their diet. And then dairy turns out to be a pretty damn good vector of sugar, and this statistic is also pretty mind-boggling. 11% of all sugar. So when you think about all the ways that the sugar industry has to, you know, get into the food supply, besides just selling plain sugar, obviously soda is a huge component of where sugar goes. Many other products, almost every product now in the supermarket has some form of sugar or amount of sugar. But 11%, I mean, that's a huge percentage, is going just for dairy products. Okay, so what does the government have to say about dairy? Well, big surprise, the federal government has decided, thanks to heavy-duty lobbying by the dairy industry, that dairy is an essential nutrient. And so even with the revision of the dietary guidelines, the last round, which gave us a pretty good pictorial, actually, for the federal government to, tell us to make up half your plate of fruits and vegetables, that was a big victory. I mean, common sense, and we've known it for years, but for the government to finally show us that was a big deal. But what's interesting about the pictorial is that you'll see, fruits, vegetables, grains, proteins. These are general concept foods. Protein is actually a nutrient. But there's one food on there that's a specific type of food, which is dairy. And it's so important to realize the power of the dairy industry lobby to get itself recognized essentially as a food group and even as a nutrient, right? So what the dairy industry is doing is equating the legitimate nutrients that happen to be contained in dairy, like calcium, like some protein, and then flipping that in your mind to just thinking dairy, right? And that's what the government has basically adopted. So in other words, you don't see under grain, it would be like instead of the grains category, it said rice or quinoa, right? Or under the protein category even, if it said steak. I mean, that's how ridiculous it is to have the word dairy as its own, essential part of, again, this is what the government says we should be consuming every single day. And not just once a day, but 3 cups, 3 servings per day of dairy. And by the way, that number was increased in the last version of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans revisions. It used to be 2 cups a day. And the dairy industry fought to get this huge increase, right? From 2 cups to 3 cups per day in the last revision. And, there was some excuse made about how Americans aren't getting enough, I think it was potassium or magnesium, one of those. I never remember because I just eat a variety of foods and don't think about it. But the point is to have that kind of an increase when we can get these nutrients from plenty of other foods is rather absurd. I will say that soy is, hidden in there in the dairy group, so the federal government has recognized that soy milk can be an alternative to dairy milk, but it's certainly not shown in this pictorial, which is the most common thing that we see with how the federal government tells us how to eat. And by the way, we're actually in the middle of a revision right now with the 2015, so the Dietary Guidelines for Americans are revised once every 5 years. So, and then in this case, the My Plate, this is the pictorial version. People sometimes confuse it used to be the food pyramid. We went through a few iterations with that. But this is the pictorial version of the Dietary Guidelines. They're not actually the same. So what's happening now is, it's the 5-year cycle is now. So the committee has spent 2 years as an advisory committee, a scientific advisory committee, that spent the last 2 years looking at the research. And so their charge is to look at the latest research to see what needs to be revised in our dietary guidelines for Americans. Well, the dairy industry is pretty happy because the committee hasn't really bothered to make any recommended changes to the current 3 cups a day serving, recommendations for your daily requirements. There's a big fight, though, we can talk about this later during Q&A if you like, over meat. So the scientific committee actually said, big surprise or big shock scientifically, that we should be consuming less meat. And the meat industry is going ballistic over that. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that turns out. But dairy is still A-OK as far as the science, so-called scientists say. So another way that the dairy lobby has had a lot of influence over our federal government policy is in federal food programs. So, again, thinking about school food, what's interesting about that school lunch tray is that the school food meal guidelines require, sensical things like certain amounts of protein, certain amounts of nutrients, et cetera. And then guess what? Milk. So once again, substituting the concept of nutrients for an actual food product. I mean, it would be like saying, well, kids need to get more carbs, so let's require bread. I mean, which doesn't make sense nutritionally, but, the federal government has gone along with this idea that, well, because, kids need calcium, we're going to require dairy. I mean, it really makes no sense. And yet, every child is required. So when they are handed their lunch tray, they have some choices for what they can take, but they absolutely have to take a container of milk. It's called required. It's a required component of the school food tray. And what that means is that the school will not get reimbursed. And that's the whole name of the game, is that the federal government spends a lot of money every year reimbursing schools, public schools, that participate in the school meal program. And so if a child says, no, I don't want to have milk, or no, I can't drink milk, or my mother's a crazy vegan and won't let me drink milk, too bad, kid, you got to take this carton of milk, and guess what? A lot of milk gets thrown away, right? Because kids don't want to drink milk or whatever, the reason is, there is one exception, which is, if you bring a note from your doctor and say, oh, I'm going to die if I drink milk, or, they do allow exceptions, but you have to go out of your way to really prove it. And up till recently, it was even required that kids get whole milk. So the dairy industry needs to push whole milk because that's, the basic form that dairy comes in. But because of some nutrition theories that say it is true that you get more saturated fat, obviously, from whole milk. But now the sort of nutrition dogma around dairy is that low fat and skim milk are better for you. We can debate that, but we're not here to do that because who cares? But the point is that so now kids are given low-fat milk. I'm not sure if I think it's low-fat or fat-free. But, that was a huge fight. But by the way, when the industry is selling more low-fat or skim milk, it's not like that fat just disappears from the food supply. Where do you think it goes? Mostly into cheese, right, or ice cream. So it's kind of a, a misperception that, oh, Americans are drinking more skim milk, so that's good for them. Well, not if they're, transferring it over to their double cheese pizzas, which is pretty much what happens. Okay, so now we want to get into the checkoff program that I mentioned earlier that most of you haven't heard of. And it's so important. And, it's like this hidden, and lots of this stuff, of course, is hidden. That's why I'm here to expose it for you. And the milk mustache ads, these kind of generic ads that you've all seen for decades, are paid for through this federal program called, there are two separate ones, but they're checkoff programs. So milk and dairy checkoff programs. The federal government mandates collections of industry fees for checkoff programs to promote milk and dairy. And so this is just an image from the dairy industry trade group that's promoting it to its members. Dairy checkoff works, hooray. And just to give you a sense of how effective this is, checkoff efforts help sell more than 7 billion additional pounds of milk. So the industry measures how well this money is being spent. In other words, for every dollar that gets put into the program by industry members, what's the return on investment? What kind of what are we seeing in terms of increased sales? And that's the whole purpose, right? To sort of address and counter this slide that the industry is seeing. I mean, it was, the checkoff program existed around the time that the slide was happening, and many other checkoff programs exist. But, of course, in the era of sliding sales, the checkoff program is crucially important. And so to see that it was resulting in this effort to sell an additional 7 billion pounds of milk, even just in 1 year, shows you how effective this is. And so, the point why it's important. It's not like, obviously Coca-Cola and the private companies and even some, private milk companies have their own marketing budgets, right? I mean, I don't like the fact that Coca-Cola spends $1 gazillion a year marketing, especially to children, but that's their right as a, private entity, as a corporation doing business in America. They can certainly market their products. What this is a government-mandated advertising program. Okay, that's what makes this really important and really absurd. So the Congress has passed a law that says every member of the dairy industry is required to put in, and it's based on their production. So based on their pounds of output of dairy, they're assessed this fee. And they are required by law to put money into this pot, which obviously creates a huge pool of money. And that's why they are able to purchase these ubiquitous ads that we see on billboards, on TV, all over the place. And it's because the federal government requires them to do so. And it seems rather crazy, given what we know about dairy consumption. So let's see where some of this, I'm going to show you where some of this money goes. But I want to first spend a minute explaining it's a little bit of legalese here, but it's also really important. And it's because when people like me criticize or raise questions about the dairy checkoff program, there's a beef checkoff. So if you've seen the beef, it's what's for dinner ads, it's the exact same thing. It's the beef checkoff program that pays for those ads. Again, federally mandated collection of fees from the industry. So the excuse, right, the argument back when people complain about this is crazy, why is the government mandating this? They say, oh, no, this is all industry money. There's no federal involvement here, or there's no federal money involved. In other words, if we try to say, well, are this taxpayer dollars? I mean, the federal government is really assessing the fees. They're certainly coordinating the effort. They're involved. They're very involved in this program. No. It's all industry fees. It's just their own money, so it's private money. That's kind of the rhetoric that we hear back from government officials, and certainly the industry wants to say, oh, it's just our money, it's not taxpayer money. Well, our U.S. Supreme Court actually had a different interpretation. And so it turns out that there are some members of the industry who don't want to be mandated to put money into this program because, some of them are actually smaller, more ethical producers of animal foods. So in one case, there was a lawsuit brought by a couple of small dairy farmers who said, we don't like where this money is going. We actually engage in some, positive environmental practices, and this fund doesn't support that. And so they took their case all the way up to the Supreme Court, and there was a separate case with the dairy, and then the beef industry was also sued, or the federal government was sued over the beef checkoff, and that case went up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court took a look at it and said, well, it looks like USDA employees are really involved in this. I mean, the decision even said that the message is controlled by the federal government. They found that USDA employees attend checkoff meetings, are responsible for the evaluation of the programs. These federal government officials are very involved in this program. And so what that meant was that it was upheld as what's called government speech. So the reason I'm telling you this is that, if you ever have a conversation with someone at USDA and they say, oh, no, that's, just industry fees, that's not a government program, you can tell them that the Supreme Court found that it's a government program, okay? So whether or not that's really true or the right outcome, because actually I don't think it's the right outcome. I think the guys who are suing, saying, hey, this is not fair, this is actually a violation of the industry members' First Amendment rights. And so there's something under First Amendment law called compelled speech. So if the government says you have to say something, you have to put a label on, or you have to put money into this fund, they have to have a really good reason for doing that. Otherwise, it's not allowed, right? Because we upheld this idea of having a right to say what we want. Well, in this case, the Supreme Court didn't follow that argument, and they said, sorry, this is basically a government program. So if it's a government program, well, then that's how we should be thinking about it. So what is happening with this government program? Well, here's a few examples. So again, the Got Milk ads, the milk mustache ads have been so ubiquitous, and it's always interesting to me to see which celebrities sign up, and many, many celebrities, sports figures, have signed up over the years. Obviously, they're probably paid a handsome fee for, and of course, by the way, it's not just milk. I mean, they've done some exposing of how do they get those milk mustache, how do they get that white to stay on their lips? They just use glue. I mean, it's, hocus pocus, right? The irony here is that many populations, most of the world, in fact, can't even tolerate milk. They're either allergic to it or lactose intolerant. And so to have, so many ads being done by members of populations, like most African Americans, like many Asian Americans, that simply don't tolerate milk. I mean, in most of Asia, they don't consume milk, certainly not in the volumes that we do here. And yet, we see all populations engaging in these ad campaigns. There's a newer, so the milk mustache ads and the Got Milk ads are kind of yesterday. I think the milk mustache ads might hang around, but Got Milk has now been replaced by this brand new campaign the industry is calling Milk Life. And again, this is definitely in response to the falling sales of fluid milk. And so they're trying to promote this idea that, milk has lots of protein, because protein is sort of the hot nutrient right now, right? Everyone's obsessed with getting enough protein, even though, it's easy to do eating a variety of plant foods. But, these ads are meant to show that, milk will make you do magical things. And then another really important part of how the checkoff program is supposed to work, but in reality doesn't, is that the actual language of the statute says that checkoff funding is a generic dairy product promotion fund to fund promotions aimed at promoting dairy consumption and protecting the good image of dairy farmers. I love that. Never mind all the horrible things that happen to dairy cows and the environmental destruction that goes on in factory dairy farms. That's not what this program is about. Dairy products in the dairy industry. So generic is the key word here. So the concept of a checkoff program is to engage in generic advertising. So, that's what the Got Milk ads are, of course. They're not brand specific. They're just promoting milk in general. But it turns out that many checkoff partners, as are depicted here, there's a few brands in there, right, that you would recognize. And so there are many, many examples. And, this is all in the USDA's reporting on where the checkoff money is going. So in other words, this program that's supposed to really be used for generic marketing and even some research activities is actually being used to promote specific brands. I'm going to give you some more examples. So one of my favorites is how the dairy checkoff program was used to develop this product called the 3-cheese stuffed crust pizza. I mean, there's not enough cheese on top of the pizza. Now they have to find ways to stuff cheese inside the pizza dough. And development of new products is actually a really key component to the dairy checkoff program. So, new products are really important to the food industry. People get bored with the same old pizza. You gotta come up with a new pizza with another cheese and stuff somewhere else. And so this is, one of the examples of a new product formulation that came out of dairy checkoff money with Pizza Hut, obviously a brand. And then similarly, Domino's. Domino's has been a big recipient of checkoff money. And so in this case, the dairy industry teamed up with Domino's for what they call a legendary partnership, and to the tune of $35 million in checkoff funds over just that 3-year period, 2009 to 2011. And then they even figured out this cost-benefit ratio, which I love, which is, again, for every dollar spent, what was the return on that investment? And so they found a 7.7 to 1 benefit cost ratio, so that for every dollar spent, there were $7 in return sales. I mean, that's huge. If you talk to anyone in marketing, getting that kind of return is, pretty rare. And again, they develop new cheeses, new lines. And then the other really important part, it's not like, when the dairy program or the checkoff program works with one brand, that's it, great for that company. It actually reverberates throughout the entire industry. So of course, particularly pizza, and by the way, pizza is ubiquitous and actually the most popular food among children of a certain age. And so the point is, it's very competitive, right? Obviously, Pizza Hut, Domino's, they're all just always vying to get a leg up on each other. So when one company comes out with, a new product or new product line or does something different, adds a 4th cheese to their 3 cheeses, then that means other companies have to follow suit in some way or another. They got to keep up. They got to create their own similar product and so forth. So it reverberates widely. And then this is like the most disturbing, well, there's lots of disturbing parts of the report, but this one in particular, is with Domino's. And, I'd heard about this Smart Slice program some years ago when it came out. And it's basically Domino's promoting itself in schools. And so why they call it the Smart Slice is because it did have some changes in its nutrition profile to meet the improved nutrition guidelines of the school meal program. So like they'll, put some whole grains in the crust and perhaps lower the saturated fat content and salt. So, they will tweak the nutrition profile. Still not really a healthful food, but the point is they will make it so that it will fit into the federal nutrition guidelines. And this particular version of that, the Smart Slice, was specifically developed with checkoff programs. And then, Domino's does, of course, a huge promotion in schools to get school food nutrition directors to purchase the product. And so again, this is a way to obviously get Domino's brand infiltrated into schools. And what's really interesting, some nutrition folks might say, well, it's a good thing to have Domino's, improve its nutrition profile of the pizza. But what's funny is, and I went to the school nutrition trade show a couple years ago and talked to the Domino's guy, and he said that, I said, well, when you create this, healthier, arguably healthier version of pizza, do you have it available like in general? Can anyone order the, half whole wheat, half of the grains being whole wheat grain crust and lower saturated fat? Oh, no, this is just for the schools. So they're keeping their full-on fat, totally white flour pizza for everyone else. They're just creating this special version that's only going to schools. And, I would feel a little bit better about it. I wouldn't be thrilled about it, but if at least it helped, kind of make the rest of their product line healthy, then, that would be better. But no, they're not doing that. I also learned, by the way, from that little visit with the Domino's guy, that the way it works is with the schools is that they have locations set up near schools. So I thought it would be like a whole separate thing, maybe frozen. No, they actually, I'm not sure how much they figure out ahead of time where to locate a Domino's outlet near a school, or if it's just happens to be, I imagine they probably do. If they want, to get into the school meal program in a big school, they would probably strategically locate, but I'm not sure if they do that. The point is that they deliver from the locations of Domino's that are near schools. I mean, just another reason to be concerned when you see a Domino's up in a neighborhood, because they're going to get it into your kid's school nearby. And then here's another example, now away from pizza into Taco Bell. And it just gets more gross, and I'm sorry for these pictures first thing in the morning, but this is what we're doing. So this product development was called there's a couple of ways that actually the dairy checkoff program really helped out Taco Bell. So start with breakfast. Breakfast is a huge money maker for the fast food industry. So when we think of fast food, tend to think of, cheeseburgers, French fries, but breakfast is so key. And so it's very competitive. And Taco Bell, before this, wasn't really into breakfast. You don't think to go to Taco Bell for breakfast. And so they wanted in on the breakfast market because it's such a huge moneymaker. And so they turned to the dairy checkoff program for some help. And that's how they got these new products made. And if you can see it, but in that little breakfast ad, so they created I think it's a waffle, maybe with some meat and cheese and eggs. I mean, it's just gross. It's just everything that's bad about breakfast food in America rolled into one. And but I remember when it made news. This is how important breakfast is to the fast food industry, that media outlets actually covered. And I was like, why? And I asked, because I know these reporters, I'm like, why are you covering this Taco Bell serving breakfast now? I don't know, it doesn't seem like important news to me. But she said, well, because breakfast is a big part of the fast food industry, and they just follow what the industry is doing. So then it even gets news coverage. And then the other product that they helped develop here was the Cantina Double Steak Quesadilla. Again, because a single steak quesadilla, that wouldn't, who would sell that? That's just not enough steak and cheese. So let's double it up. So then, of course, my favorite company to pick on fast food category is McDonald's. And they really deserve to be picked on here because they have been an incredible beneficiary of this government-mandated dairy checkoff program. in that they've had 6 dedicated checkoff employees. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that the money that is being pooled into this dairy checkoff is going to pay for the salaries of 6 dedicated employees at McDonald's headquarters in Illinois. I mean, that's kind of mind-boggling right there. Like 6 people funded by this generic program are sitting in Oak Brook, Illinois, brainstorming with McDonald's R&D department and marketing folks on how can we get more dairy into the McDonald's menu. And they've found lots of ways, and they're very successful at it. So much so, they got an additional 1.7 billion pounds of dairy into the McDonald's menu during 2009 to 11. That's a lot of dairy. And they came up with 27 new dairy products. Remember, it's all about innovation is the word they use in industry. New products are the way to drive more sales, right? People get bored with the same old shakes and Coca-Cola and whatever. So, okay, what can we do that's new and exciting? Well, it takes a lot of thought to come up with new and exciting things, and so that's where this money comes in. And so this one, the frappe chocolate, the chocolate chip frappe industry, I love this. Oh, sorry. So this particular drink, the frappe, has 530 calories and 67 grams. 67 grams of sugar, people. That's a lot of sugar, right? So again, thinking of dairy not just, which it is actually unhealthy unto itself, but being a vector for even more, just as unhealthy or even more unhealthy components like sugar. And industry is proud of their increase in dairy in the McDonald's menu, so much so that they said that the McCafe, this particular line of coffee drinks, contains up to 80% milk. Yay for the dairy industry. A coffee drink has 80% milk. Well, at that point, is it really even a coffee drink anymore? No, I think it's actually, a milkshake with a shot of coffee in it. I mean, so that's what they do. I mean, they're brilliant at it. I have to give them credit for that. They are very good at what they do. So this was some fun media coverage of my report when it came out last year. I don't know if it's a little hard to see all of the text here, but one of the main points I was making with all of this is, it's crazy for the federal government to be promoting these extremely unhealthy foods, working hand in hand with the junk food industry to do this at a time when Americans are suffering from, a public health disaster due to poor diet, right? I mean, it'd be bad enough if we were all healthy, but we're not. We're already suffering so much from diet-related diseases. And so what Mother Jones did was show directly the disconnect between what the federal government tells us, right? So I mentioned before the dietary guidelines, and then there are a number of ways that the federal government, gets it sort of right about how we should be eating, and then the money being spent in contrast on this checkoff program and with these unhealthy foods. And so, the federal government in the past has said, rightly so, Americans need to reduce our saturated fat intake and certainly reduce sugar intake. Well, I just showed you examples how that has a big disconnect with the products that are being served, and on and on. I mean, so again, it's and this is typical in the federal government that one hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing, or it's more like, well, one hand is, conflicted with what the other hand is doing. So, and particularly the U.S. Department of Agriculture has a huge conflict of interest in that, on one hand, that agency is charged with telling Americans how to eat right. So the Dietary Guidelines for Americans and food assistance programs are about helping Americans eat better. And on the other hand, they represent the animal agribusiness industry and all of agriculture. And of course, the business of agriculture is to sell more products. And the dairy checkup program is the quintessential example of that, pooling money to market to sell more dairy. So there's just this tension that goes throughout this agency, on one hand being charged with the nutrition programs, and on the other hand being charged with helping to promote the meat and dairy industries. So let's talk about schools a bit more. Milk in school. So I mentioned that, these days kids just aren't as interested in drinking plain milk. And so the industry response to that is to put sugar in it, right? And so there's a huge push to sell what's called flavored milk. So these are, some are chocolate, some are the old-fashioned, like they did have chocolate milk in the old days, but now it's sort of even gussied up more, with artificial flavors and more sugar. And so much so that now 70% of milk consumed in schools is flavored. I mean, that's just shocking right there. And by the way, plain milk itself does have some sugar. And, it's not a big deal. It's at least balanced by the other natural components of sugar. The point is it's already a little sweet. But what this is, of course, is adding more sugar to it, and with flavoring. And so this one example. So Dean Foods, by the way, is the nation's largest milk producer, and they are very aggressive with being in schools. And so they have this line of flavored milk products for students they call True Moo. And in their chocolate milk, there is a whopping 18 grams of sugar. For a small child, I mean, that is just crazy. The Heart Association says a small child, should have maybe like 4 grams in a whole day. So promoting milk in school is huge, and this is just an image of promoting chocolate milk, an image that's directly used in schools. And so what the industry does is goes around and, they'll have like the Wisconsin Dairy Board, which of course is huge, will promote heavily in schools, and they create these free marketing materials, and they hand them out to teachers, and in this case, I don't know if you've heard this, but the industry has decided that chocolate milk is a good muscle drink or a recovery drink for after workout. So, I mean, as if kids are, lifting a lot of weights in school. Maybe their backpack is the heaviest thing they're carrying around for weight, but they don't need chocolate milk to deal with that. But this is the kind of marketing messages that the industry is engaging in, and this is through the milk checkoff program specifically. And then they also have this campaign they call Raise Your Hand for Chocolate Milk. And again, the whole idea is that because regular plain fluid milk sales are declining, particularly in schools, they want to make up for it by getting kids to drink the sugary flavored milks. And then there's this program that does this in even a bigger way. And this is tied to, and there's many different dairy lobbying groups, by the way. I mean, it gets dizzying just to even keep track of them all. But the one marketing lobbying group, or the trade group, I should say, that is in charge of marketing, is called the National Dairy Council. And that group has a program that is in some 73,000 schools called Fuel Up to Play. Okay, and so this is an image, huge billboards, and the idea here is to attach activity to consuming dairy. Now, nothing wrong with getting kids to be more active. Often they're tied to, football stars and so forth. I don't really have any problem with promoting, more exercise for kids, but this program is about more than that. They position it as a nutrition education program in addition to a physical promotion program, and they get $50 million from the checkoff program. So of course it has to have a dairy component, otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. And so part of their nutrition education is, of course, to get kids to drink more milk. So it's a way to connect this idea that milk is, health promoting, because when kids see, oh well, these my favorite stars are promoting exercise and milk together, it's using celebrity promotions are very powerful, especially for children. And this program is ubiquitous, and I've talked to parents who say they've seen these types of images all over their schools. So part of the Fuel Up to Play program also involves what I call some dubious nutrition advice. And so I have many different examples in the report, but one of them is this one, which says that chocolate milk is the perfect balance of vitamins, minerals, carbohydrates, and protein, a combination that cannot be found in any other beverage. Really? I mean, certainly a balanced meal would give you all of those things. There's no need to drink chocolate milk to get those things. And then again, seeing the imagery that they use to promote the program, chocolate milk is front and center. Never mind all the sugar that comes along with it. And in the report, I interviewed my favorite registered dietitian, Andy Bellotti, who just really pokes holes in all of the nutrition messages of this program and others. And so he says that Fuel Up to Play, called Fuel Up to Play 60, is a marketing campaign hiding behind a veneer of nutrition science. And this is just a really good way of putting it. And this is also a very common industry tactic, to make it look like they're all about science, when it's really simply marketing. So here are some other misleading health claims promoted by a few different checkoff program recipients that I think are hilarious. So cheese can fit into almost any eating plan, okay, except for the ones that are actually helpful, I guess. And then cheese contributes essential nutrients for good health. Okay, but, you could, I can go, it's just funny. And my favorite one is processed cheese is made from natural cheese. What? Yeah, I don't know what that one is. I don't know how that even made it out of the boardroom or whatever room they were coming up with that one. But of course the processed cheese industry like Kraft has been on the defensive for some time. It goes into their products as nothing like nature intended, and so it's just a funny defensive posture they have to take for their very highly processed products. And so the report winds up with a number of recommendations, and basically the bottom line is the federal government should stop these mandatory assessments and just put an end to the whole checkout program. It's certainly not doing anyone any good except the dairy industry. And then I say, well, if maybe we won't get that, but at the very least, checkout funding should not promote dairy foods that conflict with dietary guidelines, right? That's pretty simple. We have dietary guidelines that say, consume less saturated fat, consume less salt, consume less sugar. Maybe we should make sure that we're not funding programs that actually promote the opposite of that recommendation. And particularly on the branding, that should stop promoting brand names, and certainly should not be promoting sugary milks in schools. And then there's this great sort of nutrition/economics professor at Tufts who actually even suggested that I dig into the dairy checkoff program. And so he has a great quote in the report I like, which is, "The meat and dairy industries can do what they like with their own money. The public power of taxation should be used for the public good." I mean, that's a pretty simple statement, right? One that I think almost anyone would agree with, and that, if the dairy industry wants to go off and spend money promoting itself, that's fine, but it shouldn't be mandated by the federal government. It shouldn't be coordinated by the federal government and promoted by the federal government, because even though some of their money is in the program, what I always like to point out too is that the federal government, the government officials who help coordinate this, their time is, at least in part, being paid for by our tax dollars. So any way you slice it, it's a government program, our tax dollars are involved. And then since I put out this report, actually a colleague of mine named Alyssa Hamilton has just published this fantastic book called Got Milked, The Great Dairy Deception. And I just want to give a shout out to it because I think it just came out in February. And, there aren't a lot of books out there that I just wholeheartedly recommend. And she's just really did her research and showing why milk is not essential and is even potentially harmful. And she's based up in Canada, and she's been sending me some media clips of her where she's, it's just a really hard thing to do. In other words, to go on, TV and debate with someone from the dairy industry whether dairy is good for you, and she's been willing to do this. And it's funny, like I said before, I wasn't even willing to do that for this report. I didn't want to get into, is dairy good for you? Is it? I kind of took this different path of showing how people are consuming dairy in all the wrong ways, and I just admire that she was willing to go for the heart of the issue. And there are other groups, of course, that have done this. Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine is an organization based in Washington here that, in this country, that has put out wonderful resources for years about why dairy is not good for you, and I would recommend their resources as well. So, and then, of course, I have to end with a plug for my own book. But, there has been some attention, to this issue, and I would say that the good news about dairy is, like I said before, I feel like there is a tide that's changing, whereas for decades, really, it was just accepted nutrition dogma that dairy is good for you and people need to get their dairy every day. And I feel like that ground has shifted, and we have mainstream nutrition professionals like Walter Willett from Harvard and my mentor Mary Nessel basically saying, dairy is not essential. If you want to consume some dairy, it may, it's not going to kill you, of course, but the point is that it's no longer really assumed to be an essential part of the diet, at least by, the independent nutrition professionals. Federal government, of course, still a different story. But I do feel like what I've noticed, among my colleagues who certainly aren't vegetarian or vegan, but they have come around to accepting this idea and are certainly concerned about the pizza and the highly sugared beverages. So I feel like there's some hope there. And with that, I think I'm going to stop and see if we have some questions. Oh, there's a question already in the back. So
hi, one comment, one question, or two comments, one question. PTA groups are having to pay for playground equipment because across the board they've really taken recess and PE out of the daily schedule to a large extent, not completely, but minimized it. And so I find it interesting, well, let's fuel up to play, but only with the milk, right? And then, less exercise. Some of the cafeterias, they cannot mandate what the children gets other than the milk. So they can pick all the candies and the potato chips and get the milk. They're not even getting anything else, and it's an atrocity on what's even on the selection of the cafeteria. I met a baker, and she said by law they had to do extremely low fat, and the fat's important for the brain. And so these kids become hyperactive with the sugar, no fat, no really good plant-based fats. And so here comes the principal is allowed to not only take out the scores because of special ed, because now they're overactive and they can put them on Ritalin, but now they get $500 per child per school on average. So it's really a very sinister cycle. And then the comment and the question is, in 1953, Louise Light presented the food pyramid to the USDA, and it was very expressly with all green vegetables at the bottom of the pyramid, and that was hijacked and changed to all grains, and I'm sure there was other things but that stuck in my mind. Did you want to comment on the food pyramid and the hijacking of what the truth was back then?
I didn't hear a question in there, but so a couple of things. So let's talk about school meals. There's no potato chips on the school meal line. So there are, separate from the school meal program is what are called competitive foods. So the school meal program has, relatively good nutrition related to it, but separate from school meals are what are called competitive foods. And up till recently, and so that's like the vending machine foods, and also foods that are served what's called a la carte on the school meal line. So there could be chips and other things that are sold separately from the school meal program, but they wouldn't be part of the reimbursable school meal. So that may be what you're talking about. And then, of course, there's the vending machines, there's school stores. I mean, there's all kinds of places, unfortunately, where kids can buy, with their own money, junk food. So up till recently, virtually no nutrition standards on this separate. There's, pretty much always been some nutrition standards on the school meal component, not on the competitive foods, the vending machine foods, and so forth. So that changed with the most recent revision to the school meal guidelines. And, I want to give the First Lady credit. She's been an incredible champion for improving school meal food. And part of that improvement, yes, she deserves credit. I mean, this certainly would not have happened without her leadership. And yet, it's still a big fight. I mean, it's crazy making. So let's talk about the fight on school meals right now. It's happening right this minute. Part of the improvement to the school meal nutrition guidelines was to require that children take half a cup of fruits and vegetables. That is the requirement. That was put into law. And this is what there's this huge fight over. And there are other things too, like lower sodium, making half the grains. It was kind of a gradual phase-in of more whole grains, making half the grains whole grains, and then moving towards all whole grains. That's been a big fight too. But the biggest fight is over this half of cup of fruits and vegetables. I mean, it's crazy. And yet, you have the pizza lobby, you have, but it's not just industry. What's really troubling about this fight that's going on right now in Washington, D.C. around school food is that the trade group, I mentioned earlier I had been to the School Nutrition Association, is the trade group that represents the nation's school food service professionals. And that group is, very powerful. I mean, they should certainly have a voice in how school food is done. But they unfortunately have taken the side of the junk food industry on this issue. And so we have, public health groups trying to fight for this little half a cup of fruit and vegetables to be required in the school meal lunch tray, and the nation's school food professionals teaming up with, the pizza and other components of the food industry to fight this. And their excuse is, oh, it's too hard, we need more flexibility. And of course, the Republicans, you don't have to convince them to take a position that goes against the Obama administration. And so they will say things like, oh, this is, big federal government meddling in school food and telling kids how to eat. And I mean, you wouldn't believe the kind of PR tactics, claiming that children are going hungry because there's also some calorie limits, like reasonable calorie limits. Children are small. They don't need the same calories that adults need. And I mean, even in high school, but they're graded based on the level of the where the child is in school. So the point is that, there have been videos put out, and there was even a hashtag going around Twitter that said, "Thanks, Michelle Obama," which was meant to be a sarcastic thanks, and then they would post pictures of school food that, didn't look appealing, or, claiming that the high school jocks were going hungry because they weren't getting enough calories. I mean, just absurd. This is just the level of discourse that we're having over just relatively minor changes to school food. So that's the school meal side. And then there's a bit of a lesser fight, but there's also certainly been shenanigans in politics around improving setting nutrition guidelines around those competitive foods, so the vending machine foods. And, I mean, this is just typical sort of junk food tactics. Like, okay, not a problem. We'll just, reduce the fat grams in our Doritos to make it fit the new school competitive food guidelines, the vending machine guidelines, right? Because, in the politics of compromise, the guidelines couldn't say, well, let's just get all that processed junk out of the vending machines altogether and just give kids some fresh fruit. Oh, no. That would be the ideal situation. But instead, it was just tinkering. The nutrition guidelines just tinker with the levels of salt, sugar, and fat in what are already highly processed foods. And so still in the vending machine foods, in the school food stores, and all these foods that are, again, sold outside the school meal program, now you've got, USDA approved Doritos because they have a little bit less fat and maybe, sprinkling of whole grain. So that's the changes that are going on there. And even that, was a fight to get. And the reason they're called competitive foods, by the way, and I've heard school food service directors complain about this, is that sometimes, kids are eating out of the vending machines and then they're not participating in the school meal program. And that's really important and not good for the school because they depend on that reimbursement. So for every child that, is filling up on the whole grain Doritos, they're not buying a school lunch that day, then the school doesn't get reimbursed. And then, of course, they can't run a reliable business, and the school meal program is expected to run as a separate business. It's not part and parcel of, in most school districts, it's not, thought of as a priority for part of how the school operates. It's meant to run as a separate, in the black business. And so school food directors are like, and just anyone who works in school food service, I mean, my heart just goes out to you. I mean, they are just in the middle of this unfortunate fight, between the Obama administration and the junk food industry. And they do have so many pressures put on them. And, really, we should all be supporting them as much as possible. But unfortunately, they're just caught in the middle of all this. But the point is that we don't need competitive foods. And so I've put out articles and comments to the federal government along the lines of, like, let's just do away with the junk foods in the vending machines altogether because, I mean, when I went to school, we didn't have vending machines. I don't know. We didn't starve. Like, I don't get it. Like, why do kids need to be bombarded with snack foods all day long if they're fed well, breakfast, some schools have a breakfast program, and those are really important, especially for children that come from poor neighborhoods. I mean, school food is a critical way that children get their nutrition. Often 2/3 of a child's nutrition happens in school, breakfast and lunch. And so, anyway, go on and on, but enough ranting about school food. Yeah.
I Hello. Oh. I came in a little late, so I'm not sure if you covered this. I know there's a lot of research about sugar being quote-unquote poison, which I seem to believe, the addictive qualities of sugar and so on. Can you speak on legal actions that have been maybe in the pipeline or taking place, or what kinds of strategies are happening? Is it going to be something similar like the cigarette industry? And how can we sort of get into that movement?
Sure.
Or is it a hopeless case?
Yeah. Okay, sure. So let's talk about the role of litigation in this whole, in food. So when my book came out 2006, and right around then, I would say maybe a couple years prior, yeah, maybe early 2000s, there was a group of lawyers who started looking at this. In other words, in fact, a couple of them had been involved in the tobacco litigation. So remember how through a variety of private lawsuits and actually state attorneys general sued the tobacco industry and got, in the case of the state AGs, they got this huge settlement out of the tobacco industry, which was, that money has then been used for a lot of good programs. And of course, there's been a lot of private lawsuits as well, alleging and correctly winning cases that said the tobacco industry engaged in a number of deceptive practices to get, the low tar thing. I mean, all kinds of ways that the tobacco industry has lied about their products, and people have relied on that and so forth. So how can we do this with food? So back in the mid-2000s, a group of lawyers kind of formed, and there were a couple of conferences that were looking at what they called legal strategies in the obesity epidemic. And they were, talking about legislation, school food, some of the issues that we still talk about now. But then there was this specific question around, can we do a tobacco-style lawsuit against big food? And so there was one case that was filed with kind of that idea. And I remember it got a lot of media attention, and negatively, of course, because there's so much negative feeling about litigation in this country. The right wing, in particular, has done a really good job of making lawyers out to be, greedy and scapegoats for everything that's wrong with private tort litigation. Anyway, so that case was filed on behalf of a man who was sick with diabetes, and he was a lifelong McDonald's goer. And, it is very difficult. I give him credit for being brave enough to even be engaged in that lawsuit because, we have this, not only does the media, or many parts of the media, want to hate on lawyers, they also want to hate on people who they say are just out to make a buck or aren't taking personal responsibility, that they're just trying to sue someone for their own problems. So that's kind of how that case got covered. But it turned out it was really more about deceptive marketing. And as these things go, it went through various iterations, but never really got far in the legal process. And so people watched that case and said, well, the thing is, when it comes to making a direct cause and effect link between eating and a health problem you might have, it's a lot harder than with cigarettes and lung cancer. So, there are more complex factors. And so that's the main reason we can't sue the same way as that. But there are potential ways to go after the food industry with deceptive marketing. And that actually was what was even successful with tobacco. So I guess my answer is we can't, so it's very difficult to sue based on like eating at McDonald's caused my disease. But there are ways to sue if McDonald's says, eating here is healthy, right? And in fact, they have made some claims to that effect over the years. But what's happening now, so that was kind of, the mid-2000s way of looking at the issue, and people kind of toyed with whether we could go after companies for causing disease or looking at it that way. That's not really happening. I think people have kind of realized that's too hard. So what's happened instead is looking at specific marketing claims, but they're not necessarily related to, they're not things like, well, McDonald's isn't really saying eat here every day, it's healthy. Instead, the lawsuits now are on specific marketing claims like natural labeling. That's been a huge sort of litigation focus. So companies that are slapping the natural label on products, which really has no meaning, and even though particularly looking at products that contain genetically engineered ingredients, because we know, Monsanto has gotten a patent for its GMO processing. Clearly, that's not natural. So the litigation efforts have really gone in that direction, and with some success. The natural product industry doesn't like the fact that they've been targeted this way, but a lot of companies have been removing that word from their packaging and changing their marketing practices as a result of this type of litigation, which I think is a good thing. There have been other similar cases looking at certain artificial ingredients. I'm thinking of one that was for fruit against I think it was General Mills that makes the product called fruit roll-ups. And so they would have images of fresh fruit on their packaging. I remember I think one was a strawberry, but no strawberries to be found, maybe strawberry flavor, in the food. So that kind of thing. And there's a group I recommend following called Center for Science in the Public Interest. And they actually are the only group that does nutrition policy that even has a litigation arm. And, I'm always saying that litigation is an important tool in the toolbox, and we certainly need to use it where we can. But this group, CSPI, has really been the only one to get that and to actually combine its nutrition policy activities or add to its nutrition policy activities with a litigation department. And so that was the group that sued General Mills over the fruit roll-ups. And that group, also to its credit, tried a litigation strategy that's near and dear to my heart, which is on marketing to children. So, we know that marketing to children is outright wrong morally. I maintain that it's probably not legally defensible, and there are other lawyers who have taken this position as well. So let me explain. So the law requires that marketing not be deceptive, right? So like I was just saying, we have lawsuits now calling out companies for using the natural label in a deceptive manner. Okay, so if a child cannot understand what marketing is, cannot understand, how marketing works, then, arguably that's a deceptive form of marketing. So there are many of us who have been screaming, hey, we can actually regulate marketing to children under this theory. And, the food industry likes to I call it, wrap themselves in the American flag or the U.S. Constitution by claiming they have a First Amendment right to market anytime, anywhere, to anybody, and it's not true. The Supreme Court has recognized something called commercial speech, and that means that you have to, follow certain rules, and the government is able to regulate speech that goes beyond these rules. So, for example, the quintessential example is, from a free speech, not necessarily advertising, but you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, right? So in other words, we don't have a First Amendment right to say anything we want. If you're causing harm, then the government can keep you from doing that. So similarly, there have been laws to regulate advertising that causes harm, like marketing tobacco to children. That's clearly not allowed. And so those of us in food are saying we could be regulating marketing to children. We just, obviously, there's a political will problem there. But so back to litigation. Sorry, that was just a little aside about how we need to regulate marketing to children. So CSPI brought a case a few years back against McDonald's for its Happy Meal, right, saying that McDonald's was unfairly targeting children with Happy Meals. Now, the trick is with litigation, a child can't be the plaintiff, right? And so the parent has to be the plaintiff. And in this case, again, the media reaction to it was, oh, this, lazy mother or whatever, the usual kinds of hating that goes on when people are brave enough to try and hold the company accountable. And but the case did get thrown out because it's how do you say that the deception to the child goes to the parent? And the lawyers who brought the case tried to make the connection, but the court didn't buy it. So we're still in this kind of limbo phase of trying to really use litigation as, I think, a more specific tool when it comes to the most egregious actions by the food industry, like marketing to children. But I'm hopeful. I'm always a big cheerleader for it. I work with some law firms as a consultant, so I'm not giving up, but it's difficult. That was a long-winded answer to that question, but it was a good one. So thank you.
Hi. I just thought it was worth mentioning that yesterday on Meatonomics, the Common Sense Consumption Act, we were told that you cannot sue a food manufacturer if you're obese or sick. Is that a state statute that a lot of the states have, or is that federal?
Okay, so this is actually a whole chapter in my book about how, as a backlash to this type of litigation, the food industry, backlash, so it wasn't, like I said, there was like one case file that didn't go anywhere, but the industry wanted to get out ahead of it. And so back in, I guess, early to mid-2000s, the industry started to go state by state to pass these types of laws. And the idea was to close the courtroom door to anyone who tried to sue the food industry, and they would have different language. Usually it was over obesity. So it was basically what was called like a ban on obesity lawsuits. And, an absurd thing to do, because we need courts as, it's often the last place to go, because, the industry is so powerful in state legislatures that, and people need to, have the harms redressed in court. And so they went state by state. There was a federal bill proposed, but it didn't get passed. It may have, I don't remember if it passed the House, but it didn't get anywhere federally. But a number of states, and I was tracking it for a while, and then the effort kind of died out because the lawsuits weren't going anywhere. But there were quite a few states that passed these bills, and it was disturbing, particularly just, again, as this preemptive measure. It's, and I remember going to one industry conference. I kind of snuck in, and they were talking about this avalanche of lawsuits. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I think there was like one lawyer talking about suing. They just really exaggerate this effort in order to get people, exercised about it and want to, stop this, phantom threat.
This program here, this is on? Yeah, this program here thank you all for being here. Like you said, early Sunday morning, I appreciate that. I appreciate you being here and sharing this information. And this conference has led some of us into a group that we can say, this is what we shall do. We may not know the end result. So my question of you is all of this information you presented here in your book?
No.
No, okay, good. And then can we use this information as a slideshow to make presentation to schools or people who are interested in joining us in this initiative?
Okay, so thank you. So let's talk about where you can get all my great information. So the good news, the bad news, it's not in the book, but the good news is it's free. So you don't actually have to buy the book to get anything I just talked about today in that dairy report. So the information that's in the book is it's kind of a look at what was going on in the mid-2000s with the Bush administration and the types of tactics that industry has been using. I don't want to say it's outdated because it's not. It's just timed around then. And it's about how the industry claims on one hand to be part of the solution and to be making great changes, but really it's just a bunch of nonsense, and they're engaging in all kinds of lobbying tactics to stop public policy from going forward. So what I like about the book, or why I recommend it, is it's a good way to understand industry tactics. Because even though the examples and the stories are, from about 2005, the book came out in 2006, it's all still relevant today. If anything, it's gotten worse in terms of PR tactics. So it's a way to understand what they do. But since then, I should say, the body of my work lives on my website, which is eatdrinkpolitics.com. And so there, if you click on reports, you will see all the reports that I've put out, over the last 5 years or so. And I believe the most recent one, or maybe the one before the most recent one, is the dairy one. So, there's a lot more detail in the report. All my reports are downloadable for free. You can certainly create your own presentation with the information that's there. Do whatever you want with anything that's on my website. I prefer if you give me credit for it. That'd be great. But, there's reports, there's blog posts, I've certainly developed a whole, deep list of resources. And there's also, in addition to my blog, there's a YouTube channel, and I have, video clips from other talks that I've given. And then on social media, I've found that Facebook isn't my thing, but but Twitter is, because, I can be really snarky in 140 characters or less. So I really encourage you, if you're on Twitter, get on. If you're not, get on Twitter. And I met Michele, it's not right there on the slide, Michele Simon. And Twitter is an amazing, amazing place. It's a total time suck, is the bad news, but the good news is a lot of fun people there who you can, share your snarkiness with. And I even met someone who came to the conference this week as a result of our Twitter exchanges. So so everything's for free on eatdrinkpolitics.com. Yeah.
So the small dairy farmers still have to contribute to the checkoff fund, correct?
Yes.
So Organic Valley, so it seems with your slideshow that McDonald's, Domino's, Pizza, all those big corporations are getting the funding to promote their products. What do the smaller farmers, can they apply for that money to do anything with what they're doing in their gardens?
I don't honestly know the answer if there's an application process for if anyone can access it. My impression is that it's pretty much run by there is a board, right? And so, probably the largest processors, members, executives at Dean Foods, the largest milk company, sit on the board and they make the decisions. But I'm glad that you raised the issue of organic. So while it's true that, all producers have to pay into this program, the organic industry, not just dairy, but the organic sector in general, has decided, hey, this is a pretty good idea, this checkoff thing. Why don't we get our own? Right? And so that's what they've done. And there's been a series of discussions about it. So there's a pretty huge trade group called the Organic Trade Association. Organic is growing by leaps and bounds. And so that group has taken the lead on applying, or I guess putting in a request to USDA. And I would assume they'd have to get a law passed through Congress. I'm not sure all the legal mechanism to get this done. All I know is the Organic Trade Association, I'm sure if you go on their website you can find out information about it, has decided, if the, evildoers can get a checkoff program, why can't we? And so, they estimate that if this gets approved, they could generate a fund of $30 million a year to engage in, arguably better forms of marketing and research to promote organic in general. And so, and there are other checkoff programs, that ostensibly promote better things, but the point is that the meat and dairy industries have the most money, so they can create, $100 million fund, and that is how much money went into, I think, either the milk or the dairy fund. And so, anyone can, in theory, have a checkoff program. Then the trick is who's got more money to, be heard louder with it.
Okay, so if you had the ear of, say, Pizza Hut or Taco Bell, what would you give them as some suggestions for the absolute best things to change? Would it be the chemicals or the bad fats or the GMOs? And if you couldn't pick everything, what one or two or three things would you ask them to change? And I promise I will pass this information to someone who might be able to make some changes.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting question about what is the role of, say, the fast food industry or the junk food industry in general, processed foods, fast food. Do we want them to change, right? What do we want them to do? And I feel like, say again? Slow them, oh yeah. But, I don't think there's a lot of wiggle room there. And actually, I was just asked to give Taco Bell some advice. And, it's like, it's silly to me, actually, to ask, McDonald's to, put some kale on their cheeseburgers. I just don't think that these companies, they're not in the business of making healthy food. They're not set up for that. They're mass production. If you were here last night, Melanie was describing how Subway, has to put, this is the same model of every fast food company, is that they have to centralize their production. They're not making anything fresh on site. So, this idea that we can somehow improve the food at a company like McDonald's or Burger King or Taco Bell, it's like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't ask them to do certain things to source ingredients from better, and they certainly should be paying workers a living wage. If anything, the one thing I would say they should change is pay their workers a living wage. Like, hands down, that was my number one request. But the food, I I just don't really care. Like, people are not going to go to McDonald's for salads. I mean, we know that already. McDonald's has tried putting salads on the menu. I mean, some say they don't promote it enough, but people don't go to McDonald's for salad. I certainly don't. I mean, I just don't think that that's the way to go. What I do think they need to change, though, is the marketing practices. So the two issues, and I would rank them pretty close to equal, but I care a lot more about the workers at the moment because they're fighting hard and they're gaining ground. And I think we can take a page from how organized and successful the workers are being in fighting for a living wage right now, getting laws passed in cities all over the nation, putting pressure on companies like McDonald's and Walmart to pay a living wage. But marketing to children. So Taco Bell isn't really a problem with that, but McDonald's certainly is, and any other food company that's using toys to lure kids in needs to stop that. That one practice alone of putting toys in the Happy Meal, of luring kids into the stores. I mean, any parent of small children will tell you they don't care about the food. Right? The child just wants the toy. They'll take the Happy Meal and throw it away and just get the toy. I mean, so let the kid go get the toy at hopefully your local toy store. And then, take your kids to McDonald's as a treat once in a while. So to me, it's about the exploitation of children and the exploitation of workers. Those two things need to stop.
Okay, it's just a comment, not a question.
Okay.
And I was just, as the tag on to what you're saying, they're not going to stop the fast food chains because it's about the money. So what we have to do is continue to do what organizations like Hypocrisy and everybody, what we're doing is trying to educate parents. That's the best way to slow them down with all of this fast food junk, is to not go and buy it. Right. And the only way to not buy it is to educate.
Yes, absolutely. Consumers have a lot of power in this, and we certainly need to get the word out that this is a problem. Of course, education is not enough. So while education is important, there's this very important concept in public health, which is that, if we change the environment that people live in, that is actually a more powerful tool than education. So while, unfortunately people don't act just on information alone. Wouldn't it be great if we did, if all we needed was the information and, we could make logical choices? But education in the face of, an onslaught of marketing from McDonald's that tells you, eating French fries will make you feel better when you're stressed out. So we need a combination. We need every tool in the toolbox. So yes, education is important, but in public health, we have this concept that people behave in ways that are very much influenced by what's around them. So you walk out your front door, your intention might be when you leave that morning to eat a kale salad, but you were late getting out the door. You didn't have time to make yourself a kale salad. What's available is McDonald's and that cheap, that lure of the cheeseburger, and it smells good and it's available, it's right there, right? So you can be educated about the importance of eating kale, but then, the reality is what's available is the McDonald's. So that's why we need both education like this and also a change in environment. Environment is a very broad term used in public health to mean what is simply available to you. And I also really want to stress the price factor. So, we know that price, and in fact, even more so than nutrition, there was just another survey that came out to confirm that people make food choices, the number one factor that they use to decide what kind of food to buy is price. So, as long as salads cost more than the cheeseburger, we can educate people all we want, but if, it comes down to price, then they're going to pick what's cheaper and, of course, what's more convenient, other factors as well. And so that's where policy change comes in. Why is it that the cheeseburger is cheaper than the salad? Because of all the government subsidies. One reason, not the only reason. But government subsidies for all the inputs of animal agriculture are certainly a big reason why that cheeseburger, and many other government supports for the fast food industry. Cheap labor is another reason. I mean, there's so many factors that go into it. But the point is, when we make policy changes and we change the environment that people live in so that we flip what the situation is now, which is that the unhealthy food is the most readily available and is the cheapest, and we switch that to making healthful foods, health-promoting foods, most available and cheaper, that's when you really start to see people's behavior change. And of course, it's not the only way, and there's certainly evidence to show, for example, if you just plop a farmer's market down in a neighborhood that has never, had something like that before, or perhaps, doesn't know what to do with kale, that's not effective. So to your point, there needs to be education to help people even know how to prepare fresh food. And so it's very interesting, a lot of assumptions that go into, say, oh, we just need to bring, better produce into poor neighborhoods, or put a supermarket. That's another, activity that's going on now. A lot of neighborhoods don't have supermarkets. Of course, we need neighborhoods to have supermarkets, and we need to educate people for what to do with how to prepare food healthfully. And the other factor that's huge is stress. And so, more studies are showing that it's not even enough to make food available and accessible, but if you're stressed out, if you're, struggling with 2 and 3 jobs, and, the last thing you want to do is prepare a meal, you just want to, stop at McDonald's to shut your kids up already because they're starving, obviously that's a huge factor. So, it's complicated, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means we need to be looking at a variety of factors, including giving people the, a different lifestyle even to help people live a healthier lifestyle in general. And that has a variety of components to it.
Good morning. I have a side question. I went to a downtown farmers market near Lake Hewlett that day. I'm trying to do some source for organic vegetable for my patients. So I talked to the guy who sell the vegetable over there, and then he told me it's organic, and he has a little label like the no sticker, not even a certified organic certification. So I bought some. I want to try it before I recommendation my patient go there. I bought some. I went home. I cook it. I try it. It's not. So for customer like this, what can we do?
We do about
Obviously it's a scam, but he's selling in public for I don't know how long, for a while, and he labeled it by his way, say organic vegetable. Letters $1 each. And for us as a regular customer, what can we do to let other people know it's not organic?
So you're saying it was labeled organic, but it wasn't?
Correct. He put the note, the little,
so it wasn't like didn't have an official organic
Right.
label. It just
Right.
like he was just claiming it was organic, but it wasn't.
Correct.
Okay, and because when you asked him, he said it wasn't really organic, or how did you
When
know?
I asked him, he said, yes, organic. Look at the label, $1 each, organic letters. And he have a little note in there, like the little, yellow sticker. You can buy that
Right.
Home Depot or whatever. So-
Well, I mean, like I was saying last night, some farmers can't afford the organic certification. So, like, if a farmer tells me they're not using pesticides and they're engaging in most of the organic practice, I just take their word for it because I know that that's a problem. It's expensive, but it is, if you're not willing to take that leap of faith, then the thing is to make sure you're only consuming organic certified products, and if it's a packaged food, then you'll see the USDA organic seal. That's the way to know that it's certified organic. And at the farmers markets, depending on where you are, there may be a local certifier. Like in California, we have California Certified Organic Farms, and so I know when I see the CCOF label, that's a certified organic farm. So, I mean, those are just the ways to know for sure. And if you're, suspicious of it, then, but, like I was also saying last night, my feeling about organic is it's important, and we should certainly be supporting it. I don't think it's something to obsess over. I think, the point is to get people to eat more fresh foods, fruits and vegetables, from any source, and then, organic is sort of added value after that.
Hi, I'm asking a question about the USDA involvement in the checkoff program. Do the fees that are charged to the dairy industry, do they reimburse the USDA for their time there, or is it truly taxpayer funded because
Right.
hundreds or thousands of USDA employees are working for these special
Right.
interest groups?
That's a very good question. So I've asked that too. And, the USDA will say that they get reimbursed, that it's reimbursed fees, that it's a fee-based program. And so, but what I've not been able to identify any USDA staffer or I haven't been able to determine that any USDA employee, say, is only working on, it's very unlikely that they have a designated person at USDA to only work for, say, one checkoff program. And that would be kind of the only way to know for sure if, it's sort of like when McDonald's embeds the checkoff employees in there. Okay, that person is paid for by checkoff dollars, but I don't have the impression, I could be wrong, but that there are staffers at USDA who are wholly funded by the fees from the checkoff program. And so I'm suspicious that it's a commingling of funds. And while some funds do help offset, perhaps, our taxpayer dollars, but to me, it's like, just the fact that we have to even think about it that way or wonder, what about the office space? What about the computers? You know what I mean? It's like when a lab is trying to separate test tubes with certain funding, because they can't do abortion work or whatever the hell it is. You know what I mean? It's like it's impossible, right? There are so many expenses that go along running an office in the federal government especially that I can't see how they can possibly claim, like we've separated out, this money from the milk industry and this, U.S. taxpayer money. And so basically the way the federal government even thinks about it is it's tax money, but being paid for by this sector of industry. And then, of course, it's got to be commingled with the rest of the tax money that we're all paying.
I start dating myself here, but 25 years ago, the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, was actually passed. Has there been any thinking about how to use that in litigation? Has that been part of a discussion with some of these kids and, finding some more of an extreme cause and effect to cause any changes?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part. How to use what?
Oh, the ADA, the American Disabilities Act. Has that been part of any legal discussions as far as protections of kids, either in a,
You mean like having chronic disease as part of that? Chronic disease would be part of ADA and then...
Yeah, or obesity or, certain fringe arguments that could be made so that there could be more attention to protection on the diets.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard that theory that somehow it would be folded into ADA. I have, I've heard a couple of lawyers talking about trying to make the connection to federal tax dollars. So similar to actually that tobacco settlement that the state attorneys general got back in the late 90s, which was based on our tax dollars being spent to clean up the health problems that tobacco caused. In other words, looking at the expenses that are being paid for by these federal programs, Medicare and Medicaid, to address the diseases that are being caused by diet-related illness, and could we sue the junk food industry, to sort of reimburse the federal government for those expenses. Again, these are great theories and they sound good, but then when you try and figure out, okay, well, who are we going to sue? How do you apportion the blame? It gets very complicated, and litigation has so many requirements that to fit it into that box is very tricky. But not to say it won't be done, but I think it's going to take, if it does happen, a lot more creative thinking. Okay. Well, thank you very much.